Austin Tech Connect is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Founded in 1992, ATC exists to help unite the local technology ecosystem and to encourage the spread of community, collaboration, and conversations in Central Texas. This podcast is sponsored by SailPoint. They are a leading provider of identity security for the modern enterprise, empowering organizations worldwide to put identity security at the core of their business. With a foundation of artificial intelligence and machine learning, SailPoint Identity Security delivers the right access to the right identities and resources at the right time. Now, here is this week's episode.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to Austin Tech Connect. You know, this is the podcast about the future of Austin's technology community. My name is Tom Singer, and I am with the Austin Technology Council. The Austin Technology Council is a 31-year-old organization whose purpose is to help bring our tech community together. And as we move into 2024, I believe we need that more than ever. So we're hoping that through these interviews that we do on the show, as we go into our second year, we are hoping that you can hear from some of these great entrepreneurs in town who are doing amazing things. And maybe if there's some synergy, you can connect with them, which is why we call it Austin Tech Connect. So today we're joined by Tom Pace, and Tom is the CEO and co-founder of NetRise. Hey, Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
For those of you who don't know Tom, he is a cybersecurity CEO who is working day and night to try to solve some really hard problems. His background is he spent time in the Marines, he's worked for the government, and now he is all in on building NetRise and making this happen and solving those cybersecurity problems that will affect you if we don't get them solved. So I thought Tom would be great to bring to the show, learn a little bit about his background, learn all about NetRise, and then hear what he thinks about Austin, because he's lived here for 5 years, and I get the best answers from those people who are more on the newcomer side to Austin than those of us who've been around 32 years like I have. So, Tom, let's start off. What's your background? You started off as a Marine. How did you get started in this world of work and security?
Yeah, I after high school, I went to a college that I wasn't that excited to be at as a computer science major. The wars picked up in the Middle East in 2004, so I dropped out, enlisted in the Marine Corps as an infantryman, like a crazy person. Finished all that after I went to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then went back to college and got back into cybersecurity, which was always the plan from day one. Worked at a couple companies like PNC Bank, Department of Energy. Worked at a startup called Cylance, and then probably made an even crazier decision, which was deciding to start a company during COVID. So here I am.
Well, there's a lot of people who started those companies during COVID. And before we get started, thank you. I mean, seriously, thank you for your service. It's so important that people like you step up to serve the country. So we appreciate you for that.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So you started this company during the pandemic. What was the idea behind NetRise, and what led you to think that entrepreneurship was going to be your journey?
I still don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. So I never had, I feel like I think people who call themselves entrepreneurs I think that's like an interesting, I guess, a noun to call themselves. Like I've just never thought of myself that way. I think there are some people who have it in their like DNA to like start companies and things like that. It never even occurred to me to start my own company ever. But the company I was working for got acquired and by BlackBerry. And if there's one thing I know about myself, almost undoubtedly, is that I am not a big company person. It's just like not what I am. And so I laid out a number of options, which were basically, stay at this big company, go work at another big company, which was equally as unappealing, basically. Go work at another startup or do my own startup. And I already knew I was going to work an absurd amount if I went and worked for someone else's startup. So I just kind of figured out, like, why don't I just go work an absurd amount for myself? Now what no one can understand is, unless you've done it, is working at someone else's startup is a lot different than starting your own, by 1,000,000 times. So, but I done a good amount of work in the industrial control system security space, and then did a lot of work in a very manual, very time-consuming way at that company, Cylance. And I just got to thinking, is there a way to really automate and productize this work that we were doing around identifying vulnerabilities and risks in products like routers, switches, cars, planes, trains, satellites, IoT devices, et cetera. And ended up figuring out a way to do that. And so that's the problem that we are solving, which has taken a backseat for too long.
No, I agree. And I want to dive into that a little bit more, but I want to go back because, I find it interesting. You said I just didn't see myself. I still don't see myself as an entrepreneur. And yet you're out there, working long hours, doing all the stuff necessary. It's interesting to me because I've interviewed about 1,400 business professionals. I mean, only 50 some odd on this show, but I had my own podcast for 10 years. And during the pandemic, I was the host of 3 different associations podcasts. So I've been playing this game of asking people, what's your background? How did you get here, for a long, long time? And I find it interesting how many former military people are entrepreneurs, did not expect to be entrepreneurs, but do a really good job at it. Why do you think that is?
Man, it's a really good question. That is something I've kind of noticed as well, especially in cybersecurity. I think there's number one, I think that there is a unique set of capabilities in terms of dealing with pain and suffering, which I think is actually a very real element of it. I also think there's like an inherent risk-taking attitude that you just kind of have to have, especially, and this is not to discount anyone else's military service all over the world, but especially for veterans in the United States over the last 15 or so years. Like, this is a volunteer-only military in the United States. And these people decided to enlist or become an officer in the United States military, knowing with a 100% certainty that multiple wars are going on. That just is a different person than other places where military is kind of mandatory, right? Which I think is actually a wonderful thing, and I wish we did it. But so I think those are 2 traits that are tend to lend themselves to successful outcomes. And there's just like the overarching theme of the military is obviously very mission and objective oriented. So thinking about things in that way, I think is, obviously pretty helpful for a business. So, and my co-founder's a Marine also. So, we took that to the extreme, I suppose.
And having talked to so many people, I totally agree with you. I think it does take a special kind of person to volunteer to be in the military, but also the amount of discipline that people have to have and is often taught, if it's not already there in the military. It's something that you have to have when you're an entrepreneur. Before we hit record, you talked about the fact that you're not married, you don't have kids, you don't currently have hobbies because you're working really hard to solve these problems. And a lot of people can't do that. They, 5 o'clock comes and they just don't have the discipline to say, I'm working through until I solve today's task. And military people, you don't have a choice. You have to solve today's task. So I think there's some muscle memory, for lack of a better term, with discipline that my military friends have.
Yeah, it's the CEO of NVIDIA just had a great video that came out maybe a couple of weeks ago. Might have even been, but he's basically getting interviewed, and they ask him, if you could take what you know now and go back 30 years, would you start NVIDIA again? And he says, absolutely not. And this is a guy worth like $40 billion or something. And he basically just talks about how it's like, it is so painful. It is whatever you think you can expect is not it. And I think there's a lot of that where it's very similar to the military in that way as well. Like, whatever you don't, there's no preparing for the military, doesn't it? That's like not possible. There's no preparing for the Marine Corps infantry. You gotta go on some runs, do some pull-ups. It's about as good as you're gonna get. But you're not simulating the experience of getting out of a helicopter in Afghanistan somehow. It's just not how it goes. And I think that's like I think that's a very helpful reference architecture to have in your mind whenever you're starting a company. Because like the number of unknown unknowns on a daily basis is just extraordinary. And people break when they have too many unknown unknowns in their life. And I'm just kind of comfortable with it, which is, I guess, good for the company, but I don't know how good it's for my own like personal mental well-being. But, that's
Well,
secondary.
I often wish that I had had that background because I worked for myself for 12 years before taking on this job with ATC, and I still have my business as a professional speaker and trainer for corporate events. And it was interesting because it was a solopreneur business. When you're a professional speaker, you're getting on airplanes, you're flying around to conferences, you're doing things. I didn't have the issue of growing something beyond me, and I didn't have employees per se. I had some contractors that I worked with. However, sometimes it got lonely and it got hard, and you just had to,
Oh,
sit there. And, I realized that I had a pretty cushy life growing up, and, I had some hardships, but nothing that really prepared me for. I had to do the sales. I had to write the speeches. I had to book my travel. I had to do all the pieces. And, you can't not show up if you've got a conference of 500 people. So in sickness and in health, you're getting on that plane, pre-pandemic days, and actually going and showing up and doing what it is that you have to do. And I did it. But I often thought, God, imagine if I just had that drive and discipline that I could have had if I had been a military guy.
yeah. I think it's helpful, right? And I'll tell you, man, it's you bring up the whole the loneliness factor is profound. I don't that's probably one of the most surprising, I don't know what to call it, experiences as part of this, right? Is that you grow your network in a just extraordinary way. Um, and you're talking to people constantly. And I'm on a plane, I'm traveling, I have meetings, I have dinners, I have events, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. People are like, man, this guy's just out there. It's the loneliest feeling you can imagine. It's crazy. It's very contradictory and counterintuitive for people
Yep.
looking
Well,
at it outside, right? So, but it's a good observation for sure. You're not
Well,
alone.
and that's one of the reasons, a lot of people join Young Presidents Associate or Organization or EO or
Yeah.
Vistage. And actually, we've been asked by some of our members to start a CEO peer group that would be a little bit more cost effective, like in the $2,500 range and not like the $15,000 range, to be able to
Yep.
have a group of 10 CEOs who have, I think the ones that I'm starting to work with, I'm mapping this out. The idea is like 10 to 100, 150 employees, because you get bigger, you have some different issues in your company, and if you're a pure startup, you've got some other things. But people are hungry for that camaraderie of people who understand what it's like to be trying to grow a company like you are. And so I've been hearing from some of our members, hey, can you put something together in the council that allows us to have a forum, allows us to have a mastermind group that we can have, for a year or more. And so I'm going to start that in February, I think. So that's
That sounds
it's
great. I think that'd be valuable for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So let's get back to NetRise. So what is the problem that you're solving? Let's dive deeper into this. And why is this something that everybody should be paying attention to?
Yeah. So basically the overall thesis of the problem we're solving is providing visibility and risk identification into a class of devices that historically have had none. So what are those devices, right? If we think about laptops, desktop servers, like traditional computers, we have a million ways to identify vulnerabilities and risks on those things. It's a very well understood problem. It's incredibly mature. This is a problem we've basically been solving since the 1980s, frankly. The device types that we are focusing on it's frankly impossible to utilize the same kind of technology to gain the same kind of visibility and risk identification for things like IoT, Internet of Things, industrial control systems, medical devices, like embedded systems in vehicles, planes, trains, automobiles, weapon systems, et cetera, satellites, and then like telecommunications equipment. So routers, switches, VPNs, firewalls, wireless access points, all that kind of fun stuff. So all of these all of these kind of miscellaneous long tail devices that can connect to the internet, but can't support traditional cybersecurity solutions is the type of thing that we are going after. And it's just a significantly more difficult problem than addressing the other things for a number of reasons. And so that's really what we are doing. And it requires a number of novel approaches, not only from an analysis perspective, but also from a how you think about developing the infrastructure and architecture to support it, because it needs to scale in a way that's frankly a bit unreasonable. And which is great, which is part of the fun, right? And so having solved a number of those novel problems has, yielded some fairly positive results so far. So, but yeah, that's the problem we're addressing. And we're addressing it for everybody from the companies actually developing the devices themselves, so the actual device manufacturers, to the people using the devices at the end of the day. So there's a fairly broad set of go-to-market motions that we're able to pursue.
We're going to take a quick second to thank the sponsor of this episode. Our sponsor is Insperity. At Insperity, it's not just HR outsourcing, it's HR that makes a difference. Their comprehensive, scalable HR solutions offer an optimal blend of service and technology to facilitate growth. They provide the tools to help you lighten your administrative load, maximize productivity, and manage risks so that you can focus on growth, because that's what it means to have a true HR partner. Learn more at Insperity.com.
So what are some of the downsides if the security is not in place for these types of devices? Like you said, I understand it for my computer and my phone, but in all these other things where things are embedded and these smart products that are connected to the internet all the time, I mean, what happens if someone hacks that?
Yeah, so I mean, just think about a very kind of simple example. A firewall or your router has to connect to the internet directly, right? So for your laptop at home, I hope you have antivirus. I hope you're doing a couple things that exist on your laptop. I hope you're storing your passwords in a password manager, or maybe you're filtering your internet traffic through something. Like, okay, great. So what are you doing for the thing that actually connects you to the internet? The actual firewall. Like, who's watching the watchman? And what people still don't really realize, which is frankly confusing to me, but it's my job to unconfuse people, I suppose, is that a firewall is just a computer like anything else. There's no difference. It's running an operating system. It has, files and applications and users and passwords and everything else on it. And yet we don't treat it as such, because it doesn't have a keyboard, it doesn't have a mouse, it doesn't have a user sitting in front of it all day, every day. And yet it is the very thing protecting our networks. And so as a result, just like you would imagine in any other facet of life, if you don't have visibility into something, and then you finally do get visibility, what would you expect the results to be? Would you expect the first time somebody uncovers something that it's just perfect? Is that what you would expect? Because that's never happened. So it's what we have uncovered is a problem of magnificent scale, even for very, very large device manufacturers. And so what happens is these devices can get compromised, and you can't know that because you don't have, at the most basic example, you can't install antivirus on a firewall, right? I mean, I guess if we want to get wildly technical, I guess it is technically possible, but no one does, right? That's not like, if you're at home and you're like, I want to install antivirus on my router, you can't do it, right? So you don't have the same kinds of capabilities to prevent, detect, and respond to issues. And you're not even going to know. You have no way of knowing if your router has been compromised, aside from like your IS, your internet service provider, reaching out to you and saying, why is your router like part of a botnet, right? Which happens all the time. So
Really?
yeah, they crack your password on the router or exploit some vulnerability you didn't know existed. And now they basically exist on your router and turn your router into a bot as part of a bigger botnet or a number of other things that they can do. So that's the problem at a high level, and that is some examples of what the impacts of that problem not being solved already are and can be.
So who are the types of customers that you're already working at with? You don't have to name names per se, but who are the types of customers and who are you looking to serve moving forward?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we are working with device manufacturers across multiple verticals. So not just medical device manufacturers, but we're also working with automotive manufacturers, network device manufacturers, like camera manufacturers, printer manufacturers, all these kinds of companies, as well as the end users of those devices. So, think about like, especially on the larger enterprise side, they are very interested in the fact that there are vulnerabilities in the very devices that are meant to be protecting them, especially when they don't know about them. That tends to make them less than thrilled. So that financial services, energy, things like that. We also are doing a good amount of work in the federal government space. Me and my co-founder obviously both spent a fair amount of time there in various roles. And then we also sell to like consulting firms who are interested in doing this work, like basically the same kind of work I was doing prior to this. And so we basically speed up their ability to conduct assessments and do consulting engagements and things like that. So we have a number of go-to-markets that all are bearing fruit. So that's been pretty good.
So how big is the company now, and what are your plans for growth?
Yeah, I mean, so we're at like 30 people right now. We just hit our 3-year mark about 2 weeks ago, which feels like 5,000 years and 5 seconds at the same time. Plans for growth are we have a very strong pipeline. Getting through this crazy macroeconomic environment as unscathed as possible is really important. Getting market validation in multiple verticals and multiple go-to-markets is really important to us. We're executing on that, very, very well. Other ways to continue expanding are just continuing to add, very important features to the platform that we know are important to not just one customer type, but are important to many, because we built one platform, right? We don't sell people different things. And so that requires you to build something in a frankly more complex way sometimes. But if you can execute on that well, you build something that a very basic user can use and a very advanced user can use at the same time. And that's a tricky line to walk, but that's kind of the approach we've taken, and it's worked pretty well for us so far.
So Austin actually has a little cluster of cybersecurity companies here in town. I've been trying to get some of them to get involved with the Austin Technology Council. Is it a close-knit community, or is it, there's a company I didn't know, kind of constantly crossing your radar in your space?
Super close-knit. We have a number of happy hours and meetups. Like, I would say we probably get together once a month in some capacity. There's probably 8 or 9 different like groups of folks. And then, some of the banks, some of the venture capital firms, some of the PE firms in town have events that they put on. So those are other opportunities for us to get together. So yeah, it's a really awesome community for sure. It's
Nice.
very close knit. Yeah.
So that's a great transition, right? So you started your company 3 years ago, but you moved here 5 years ago. So first question is, why did you come to Austin? Why Austin? You grew up in, I think you said, the Pittsburgh area. You were living
Yeah.
in New Orleans at the time. You'd been in the military for a long time, working for the government for a long time. What made you say Austin, Texas?
Yeah. So whenever the company I was working for got acquired, uh, number one, I didn't want to pay income tax on that. So that was one reason. So I
Makes
started
sense.
looking around at different cities where there was no state income tax. So Texas was obviously one of them. And I traveled for work just nonstop at this point. So it was and we had an office here in Austin actually. So I was here a good bit, and I just really liked the city. I really don't, the people here were great. I had like a pretty good built-in friend group here by just day one, because I had a ton of coworkers here that were all my friends, and they kind of adopted me into their local friend groups, and it just allowed me to get a pretty good foundation really, really fast. That's pretty much eroded since starting this company. But that's the way it goes. So, but yeah, it's that was a lot of the rationale. I just really liked it here. Back then, I mean, it's really nuts. So my house was on the market for like 8 months in 2018 before I bought it. And it's a brand new house. If I put my house on the market right now, it would be gone in 8 hours. Right. So the market back then was just awesome. It's just it's changed. I know I know I get all the hate speak from all the people who've been here for longer than 8 years. Like, you think it's changed in 5 years. I'm like, listen, that's the only aperture I got, guys.
Well, Tom, you know what they say about Austinites. If you ask any Austinite, when was the best time in the history of Austin over the last 40 years? Their answer always is the week I moved here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's been amazing to see how much this city has changed in a really short period of time.
Yeah, it's almost unprecedented for a city our size to have gone through as
Crazy.
much change as we have in the last 5 to 7 years. And you would think a global pandemic would have slowed it down, and instead it hockey sticked, our growth. But along with that came, the infrastructure problems and the cost of living, and the hard ability to find an apartment or a house and things like that. So we've got some things we need to work on as a community to make sure we know where we're going. And again, that's another purpose that we have at the Austin Technology Councils. We're trying to have some of these tough conversations about, what do we want Austin to be in 5 or 10 years? So as you start your company, how did you feel about sort of the entrepreneurial culture? Did you feel welcome? Did you feel supported? How do you feel as a somewhat new business owner?
Yeah, I mean, it was tricky, right? I started it in December of 2020, so I did feel like there was a good support infrastructure here for entrepreneurs and CEOs and things, but it was COVID, so you weren't really able to realize it, which is not the fault of the community, of course. So, but like as we kind of emerged from that madness, it's made up for it in spades, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, no complaints at all there. There's a great venture capital community here, great banking community here, great startup and founder community here. It's really, really good.
So if you had a crystal ball, what do you see as the future of our tech ecosystem in Austin?
I mean, I guess I have a hard time imagining a scenario where it doesn't continue moving up and to the right. Uh, you know, unless San Francisco somehow pulls its head out of its ass. Right? Like, other than that, which there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of signs of that happening. But like, that's the really, you have like Austin competing with like Miami, it seems a little bit, and places like Denver, maybe to some extent. But Austin, it's there's so much room here. It's so favorable from a tax perspective, both personally and from a corporate perspective. You have big companies here. It's really easy to get to places like you're in the middle of the country. You can get to Dallas and Houston in a pretty easy drive, and San Antonio. Like it's like very logical, frankly, right? It just like makes sense. And so, and also as a result of this whole remote work thing, right? Which just isn't going anywhere. And these companies trying to force a square peg into a round hole, man, like good luck. Um, so, and we're totally remote and it works great for us. So, I don't know. But yeah, I would expect it to continue to go, very, very well.
And I agree with you. I'm super bullish on Austin, or I never would have taken this job, and I wouldn't be trying to ring the bell to get everybody, more involved in looking to that future. But it is true, like you said, there are other cities popping up. 10 years ago, there was the Valley, there was New York and Boston, Southern California. Then there was Austin, right in the middle of the country, when you really thought about where is technology. And now, I wrote about this in our newsletter a couple of weeks ago. There are 100 technology councils in North America, and some of them, their communities are super strong. I'm trying to regrow the Austin Technology Council, and my thought is we should have the strongest community council, because we're Austin. But it's fascinating when I travel, I meet with the leaders of these different cities and to see where they are. And often in Austin, we don't think of places, that are really sort of thriving. Some of the cities you mentioned, Nashville, even Pittsburgh, and some others, they're really positioning themselves to be a competitive force. And I don't think we have to compete. I think we just have to, in Austin, be aware that we're not the only alternative anymore to the Valley. There's a lot of places. And I think as cities, we can work together because of this remote work, situation. Is you easily could have on your team people who live in Miami and Denver and Pittsburgh and Nashville and Phoenix and things like that. And that means you're automatically part of those communities as well.
Yeah, and we do. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I just tell people, as it pertains to this, when folks ask me things like, where should I move? I just tell people all the time, just be where you want to be, like wherever that is, like there's no wrong answer. So
Yep. I think that's great advice. So,
like,
Tom, I ask everybody before I let them go, I ask them the same question. So I believe, and I've taught this as a presenter and a trainer for years, I believe that community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. Which one of those words resonates with you the most, and why?
well, I think one of those words encompasses the other two. So, which would, I think, is fairly obvious in community, right? If you have a community that's going to engender collaboration, it's going to create conversations and things like that. So that I think is almost certainly the most important one. And human beings are social creatures. So creating that sense of community is, I think, really important. It's even more so as it pertains to this kind of community, because as I mentioned in the past, right, like a lot of us are pretty stuck in our own minds as it relates to the companies we're running and things like that. So having some, sense of community with a set of people who are going through the same set of experiences, I think is, pretty valuable.
You're preaching to the choir with me. I agree with you. So final question. If someone was coming to visit you and you weren't going to work 35 hours a day and you were going to take a little time to show that friend, who you went to college with at Pitt, or someone you palled around with in New Orleans, if somebody was coming to visit you, where would you take them? Show them the vibe of Austin.
It's a really good question. I don't know. I'd probably take them on a little tour. Some maybe like Nickel City in East Austin, and maybe like P6 Line Hotel that has a nice rooftop, and then maybe a walk around Lady Bird Lake, something like that. Uh, nice little bar hopping situation there. So probably something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could hit dive bars, fancy rooftop bars, a couple of speakeasies,
Yeah.
and have a couple of beers on a sidewalk cafe, and you could have a pretty good day in Austin and let people pick up that vibe. So that's a great answer, and I think the first time I've heard it put kind of that way, and so a little pub crawl wouldn't be a bad idea if somebody came to town. Well, Tom Pace, thank you so much for being here and letting us know about NetRise. Hey, if somebody wanted to find you or the company, how do they do that?
Websites, www.netrise.io. I'm on LinkedIn. That's really the place I interact with people the most. I have like a Twitter account and stuff, but I don't even pay attention to it. So, yeah, that's really the easiest way.
Awesome. Any last words for the audience?
No, just thanks for doing this and looking forward to seeing what the, Technology Council, does in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. If it wasn't for the audience, why would we even do this show? I need some help, though, because the Austin Technology Council, we're working to be a grassroots organization once again. And I'll tell you something, you can't be a grassroots organization unless the grassroots steps up and takes charge. So we're inviting you and your companies to join the Austin Technology Council now and help us find our mission, our vision, and the actions needed to help Austin grow for the next few decades. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Tech Connect podcast. Make sure your company is a member of the Austin Technology Council and add your voice to the future of our tech ecosystem in Central Texas.